The ship was dying. Park Yuna could feel it in the way the metal screamed around her, in the way the lights flickered from white to red to nothing at all. She gripped her seat harness as the horizon's grace tore through the atmosphere of the unnamed moon, spinning like a leaf caught in a storm. Through the chaos, she heard Captain Rue's voice on the intercom, calm even as death approached. "Brace for impact. All hands, brace for impact." Then came the collision. The world became noise and pain and darkness. Yuna felt herself thrown against her harness, felt something crack in her chest, felt the cold kiss of blood running down her face. And then, mercifully, she felt nothing at all. When she woke, the silence was worse than the screaming had been. Yuna opened her eyes to find herself hanging upside down, still strapped to her seat. The survey vessel had broken apart on impact, and her section of the ship now rested at a strange angle against what looked like a wall of black stone. Emergency lights painted everything in shades of red, making the wreckage look like the inside of a wound. She released her harness and fell, landing hard on what had been the ceiling. Pain shot through her ribs, but she forced her stand. She was alive. That was more than she had expected. "Hello?" She called out, her voice rough. "Is anyone there?" For a long moment, only silence answered. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, she heard a groan. Yuna climbed through the twisted metal, following the sound. She found Kan Taiho, the ship's engineer, pinned beneath a fallen beam. He was a large man, strong from years of physical work, but even he could not lift the weight that held him down. "Hold on," Yuna said. She looked around and found a metal pipe that had broken loose. Using it as a lever, she pushed against the beam with all her strength. Her ribs screamed in protest, but slowly the beam began to move. Taiho pulled himself free and lay gasping on the floor. "Thank you," he managed. "I thought I was going to die there." "Not today," Yuna said, though she was not sure she believed it herself. Together, they searched the wreckage. They found Dr. Beekselmi in the medical bay, unconscious but alive, with only minor cuts and bruises. She woke as they pulled her from the debris, her scientist's mind immediately asking questions about where they were and what had happened. The last survivor they found was Lee Do-hyun, the youngest member of the crew. He had been the pilot, had fought to control the ship as it fell. He sat now in what remained of the cockpit, staring at the shattered controls with empty eyes. He was unhurt in body, but Yuna could see that something inside him had broken. "I tried," he whispered when they reached him. "I tried everything, but the ship wouldn't listen." "You kept us alive long enough to crash," Taiho said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Without you, we would have burned up in the atmosphere. You saved us." Do-hyun did not seem to hear him. He just kept staring at the broken controls. Of the 12 crew members who had been aboard the Horizon's Grace, only these 4 had survived. The others were either dead in the wreckage or had been thrown from the ship during the crash. There was no time to mourn them, no time to do anything but focus on survival. Yuna took charge without anyone asking her to. It felt natural, like putting on a coat that had been made just for her. She had always been this way, even as a child. When others panicked, she grew calm. When others froze, she moved. "We need to assess our situation," she said. "Taiho, check what equipment we can salvage. Somi, find out everything you can about this moon. Do-hyun." She paused, looking at the broken pilot. "Rest, recover. We will need you later." She stepped out of the wreckage and got her first real look at where they had landed. The ravine stretched before her like a wound in the earth. It was perhaps 100 meters wide, with walls that rose so high she could not see where they ended. There was no sky visible, only darkness that seemed to press down from above like a physical weight. The only light came from strange plants that grew along the walls. They were not quite plants. Yuna realized as she looked closer. They were more like fungi, glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. The light was beautiful in a way, but it was also deeply unsettling. It felt wrong somehow, alien in a way that went beyond the simple fact of being on another world. The floor of the ravine was covered in black sand that crunched under her boots. In the distance, she could see large rock formations rising from the ground like teeth. The air was cold and thin, but breathable. It smelled of metal and something else, something organic that she could not identify. Somi joined her, scanner in hand. The xenobiologist's face was pale in the blue light, but her voice was steady. The atmosphere is safe to breathe. Gravity is about 80% of Earth's standard. Temperature is low, but survivable. She paused, looking at her scanner with an expression Yuna did not like. There is something else. What? Movement signatures. Multiple. Large. Somi looked up from the scanner, fear creeping into her eyes. We are not alone down here. As if in answer, a sound rose from the depths of the ravine. It was a howl, but unlike any howl Yuna had ever heard. It was deep and resonant, seeming to come from everywhere at once. It echoed off the stone walls, bouncing back and forth until it was impossible to tell where it had originated. The sound reached inside Yuna's chest and squeezed her heart with cold fingers. Dohyun screamed. Taiho stumbled out of the wreckage, his face white. Even Somi, who had faced dangerous creatures on a dozen worlds, took a step backward. Only Yuna did not move. She stood at the edge of the wreckage, staring into the darkness where the howl seemed loudest. She was afraid. Of course she was afraid. Only a fool would not be afraid of a sound like that. But fear was a feeling, and feelings could be controlled. The howl faded, leaving behind a silence that was somehow worse. In that silence, Yuna made a decision. We cannot stay here, she said. The ship is too exposed, too visible. We need to find shelter, something we can defend. Defend against what? Dohyun asked, his voice shaking. Another howl rose from the darkness, closer this time. It was followed by another, and another, until the ravine was filled with a chorus of hungry voices. Against that, Yuna said. They worked quickly, salvaging what they could from the wreckage. Taiho found 2 plasma cutters that could serve as weapons. Somi gathered medical supplies and her scientific equipment. Dohyun, despite his fear, helped carry food and water containers. Yuna led them along the ravine wall, searching for a defensible position. The owls followed them, sometimes near, sometimes far, but never stopping completely. Whatever made those sounds was tracking them, learning their movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. They found a cave about 1 kilometer from the crash site. It was small, with a narrow entrance that could be defended, and it went deep enough into the rock to provide shelter from the cold. It was not much, but it was better than the open ravine. As they settled into their new home, Yuna stood at the entrance and listened to the howls in the darkness. The creatures out there were patient. She could feel it. They had hunted in this ravine for generations, and they knew that prey could not escape. But Yuna was not prey. She was human, and humans did not wait to be hunted. We will survive this, she said quietly, to herself as much as to the others. Whatever is out there, we will survive. In the darkness, the predators howled their disagreement. 2 days passed in the darkness of the ravine. 2 days of fear, of watching, of waiting for death to come crawling out of the shadows. Yuna had organized the survivors into a routine. They took turns keeping watch at the cave entrance, 2 at a time, 4 hours each. They rationed their food and water carefully, knowing that rescue might be days away. The distress beacon was working, sending its signal into the void, but the nearest rescue station was at least 6 standard days away, if anyone heard them at all. In those 2 days, They learned about the creatures that hunted them. Somi was the first to see one clearly. She had been on watch with tHFY when a shape emerged from the darkness, moving toward the cave entrance. tHFY had raised his plasma cutter, ready to fire, but the creature stopped just at the edge of the blue light from the fungi. "Do not move," Somi whispered. "Let me study it." The creature was a nightmare given form. It stood 3 meters tall, on 6 legs that ended in sharp points, like the legs of an insect grown to monstrous size. Its body was covered in black plates that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It had no eyes that Somi could see, but its head was covered in small holes that pulsed and twitched as it moved. The creature opened its mouth, and Somi saw rows of teeth that curved inward, designed to hold prey that struggled. Then it howled, and the sound was so close, so loud, that Somi felt her bones shake inside her body. tHFY fired. The plasma bolt struck the creature's chest, burning through its armor. The creature screamed, a sound even worse than its howl, and retreated into the darkness. They heard it crashing through the ravine, heard other howls answering it, and then silence. "What was that thing?" tHFY asked, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped his weapon. Somi's mind was racing, putting together the pieces. "It has no eyes," she said. "Those holes on its head, they must be for echolocation. It sees with sound, like a bat on Earth. That is why it howled before attacking. It was mapping our position. So it is blind? Not blind. It sees differently than we do. And in this darkness, its way of seeing is better than ours." Somi looked at her scanner, reviewing the data she had collected. "I will call them night moths. They are perfect hunters for this environment. No light means nothing to them. They hunt by sound." Over the next day, more night moths appeared at the edge of their camp. They never attacked directly, not after tHFY had wounded one. Instead, they circled, howling from different directions, testing the humans' reactions. They were learning. Dohin was the first to show signs of breaking. The young pilot had not slept since the crash. Every howl made him jump. Every shadow made him reach for a weapon he did not have. He talked to himself when he thought no one was listening, muttering about the crash, about the controls that would not respond, about the crew members who had died. On the third night, Yuna found him sitting at the back of the cave, staring at nothing. "They are playing with us," he whispered when she sat down next to him. "They know we cannot escape. They are just waiting until we are too weak to fight, too tired to resist. Then they will come for us, all of them at once, and we will die screaming in the dark." Yuna did not tell him he was wrong. She could not, because she suspected he was right. "Maybe they are playing with us," she said instead. "But games have rules, and rules can be broken." "How?" "There are dozens of them and 4 of us. We have 2 plasma cutters, and they have claws and teeth and the entire darkness on their side. How do we break their rules?" Yuna did not have an answer, but she refused to accept that there was no answer to be found. "Get some sleep," she said. "That is an order. I will keep watch." Dohyun laughed, a hollow sound with no humor in it. But he lay down and closed his eyes, and eventually his breathing slowed into something like sleep. Yuna returned to the cave entrance and looked out into the ravine. The night moths were out there, invisible in the darkness between patches of glowing fungi. She could hear them moving, could hear their soft clicking sounds as they communicated with each other. They were coordinating, planning, preparing for something. tHFY joined her, plasma cutter in hand. "He's right, you know," the engineer said quietly, "about us not being able to win a straight fight. I have been thinking about the numbers, the angles of attack. Even if we fight perfectly, they will overwhelm us. Then we do not fight a straight fight. What other kind is there?" Yuna was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know yet, but there's always another way. Humans did not survive on Earth by being the strongest or the fastest. We survived by being clever, by finding the weaknesses of things that should have killed us. These things do not seem to have weaknesses. As if to prove his point, a howl rose from the darkness. It was followed by another and another, the sounds overlapping and echoing until they seemed to come from everywhere at once. The noise was designed to disorient, to confuse, to make it impossible to know where the threat was coming from. But Yuna noticed something. When the night moths howled, the glowing fungi pulsed brighter. It was subtle, easy to miss, but it was there. A connection between the sound and the light. "Somi," she called. "Come here. I want you to see something." The xenobiologist joined them, her scanner already in hand. "What is it?" "The fungi. Watch them when the creatures howl." They waited. A few minutes later, another howl echoed through the ravine. Somi watched the fungi on a nearby wall, and her eyes widened. "They respond to sound," she said, her scientific excitement momentarily overcoming her fear. "The howls trigger a response in the fungi. They glow brighter when exposed to certain frequencies. Why would that matter?" Taiho asked. Sami's mind was working, making connections. The night moths use echolocation. They send out sounds and listen for the echoes to build a picture of their environment. But what if the fungi are part of that system? What if the creatures use the fungi's glow to enhance their echolocation somehow? Can we use that against them? Maybe. I need to study this more. Somi looked at Yuna with new hope in her eyes. "You might have found something. A weakness." But before they could discuss it further, one of the night moths attacked. It came silently this time, having learned that its howl gave away its position. One moment the entrance was clear. The next a nightmare of black plates and curved teeth was lunging toward them. Yuna moved without thinking. She grabbed the plasma cutter from Taiho's surprised hands and fired, the bolt catching the creature across its face. It screamed and fell back, ichor spraying from the wound. She fired again, aiming for the legs. Another hit. The creature collapsed, its remaining legs scrabbling uselessly against the stone. Yuna stepped forward, standing over the wounded thing. It clicked and hissed at her, its ruined face turned in her direction, even though it could not see her. She could feel its hatred, its hunger, its absolute certainty that it was the superior predator. She fired a third time, and the creature went still. The howls that followed were different, angrier, more coordinated. The pack had lost one of its own, and it wanted revenge. But Yuna had learned something important. The night moths could be killed. They could be hurt. They were not invincible monsters from nightmare. They were predators. And predators could be hunted. She looked at the dead creature at her feet, then at the glowing fungi on the walls, then at Somi with her scanner. "Find me their weakness," she said. "Find me a way to fight them. I do not care how long it takes or what you need to do. Find it." Somi nodded. "I will." In the darkness, the night moths howled their rage. But there was something else in their voices now, something that had not been there before. Uncertainty. They had hunted in this ravine for generations. They had never lost a pack member to prey before. The rules of the game were changing, and they did not know how to respond. Yuna smiled grimly. This was how humans survived. Not by being stronger or faster, but by refusing to play by the predator's rules. The hunt was no longer one-sided. Somi worked through the fourth day without rest. She studied the glowing fungi, taking samples, running tests with her limited equipment, trying to understand the strange relationship between the plants and the predators that hunted in the ravine. The others watched the entrance in shifts, listening to the night moth circle in the darkness. The creatures had not attacked again since Yuna killed one of their pack, but they had not retreated either. They were out there, waiting, watching with ears instead of eyes. Yuna sat with Somi as the scientist worked, partly to keep her company, and partly because she needed to understand what they were facing. "Tell me about the fungi," Yuna said. Somi held up a piece of the glowing plant. It pulsed softly in her hand, the blue light making her fingers look like they were made of ice. "These organisms are unlike anything in the galactic database. They are not true plants or true fungi. They are something in between, something new. What makes them glow? Sound, vibration. When sound waves hit them, they convert that energy into light. Different frequencies create different responses." Somi pointed to a cluster of fungi on the nearby wall. "Watch." She hummed a low note. The fungi flickered, their glow becoming unsteady. She hummed a higher note, and they pulsed brighter. She tried a third frequency, even higher, and the fungi dimmed almost completely. "You see? They respond to specific tones. The night moths have evolved to use this. Their howls are not just for echolocation. They also trigger the fungi to create patterns of light and dark. The creatures read these patterns to navigate." Yuna understood immediately. So the night moths use the fungi like a map. They howl, the fungi respond, and the response tells them where everything is. Exactly. It is a brilliant adaptation. In total darkness, with no light from stars or moons, they have created their own navigation system. Somi's scientific admiration faded as she remembered their situation. Unfortunately for us, this means they have a huge advantage. They know this ravine perfectly. Every rock, every cave, every path. We are blind, and they can see everything. "But there was that frequency that made the fungi go dark," Yuna said. "What if we could use that? If we could make the fungi stop glowing, would the night moths lose their ability to navigate?" Somi's eyes widened. She had been so focused on understanding the science that she had not thought about the practical application. "In theory, yes. If we could produce a sustained tone at that frequency, it would disrupt the entire system. The fungi would go dark, the night moths would lose their map, and they would be effectively blind. How do we produce that tone?" This was where Somi's hope faded. The frequency is too high for most standard equipment. Our audio systems were damaged in the crash. tHFY has been trying to repair them, but even if he succeeds, the equipment can only produce the frequency in short bursts, not long enough to matter in a fight. Yuna stood and walked to the cave entrance, looking out at the patches of glowing blue that dotted the ravine walls. The night moths were out there somewhere, invisible in the spaces between the light. She could hear their soft clicking, their communication, their patience. They would attack again. It was only a matter of time. And when they did, they would come in force, using their numbers and their knowledge of the ravine to overwhelm the humans' defenses. Unless the humans found a way to blind them first. tHFY emerged from the back of the cave, wiping grease from his hands. "I heard what you were saying about the sound frequency. I have an idea." "What?" "The plasma cutters. They generate a lot of energy when they fire. If I could modify one of them to convert that energy into sound instead of heat, we might be able to produce the frequency Somi described. Would it work?" tHFY hesitated. "Maybe, but it would destroy the cutter. We would lose it as a weapon. And I'm not sure how long the sound would last before the modified cutter burns out. Minutes, maybe. Not hours." Yuna thought about it. They had 2 plasma cutters. If they converted one to a sound weapon, they would have only one left for defense. It was a risk, but it might be their only chance. "Do it," she said. "Modify one of the cutters. Keep the other one ready." tHFY nodded and went back to work. Somi continued her research, looking for any other advantage they might use. Dahyun sat in the corner, still haunted by his failure during the crash, but at least now he was sleeping when he could. That evening, Yuna sat alone at the cave entrance, taking the first watch shift. The ravine was quiet, the nightmares resting or perhaps planning their next attack. The only sound was the soft pulse of the fungi and the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Yuna began to hum. It was something she did without thinking, a habit from childhood. Her grandmother had been a pansori singer, a master of the traditional Korean art of musical storytelling. Yuna had grown up listening to her grandmother's voice fill their small home with songs of ancient heroes and tragic lovers and the beauty of the natural world. Her grandmother had trained her too. Hours and hours of exercises, learning to control her breath, to shape her voice, to reach notes that seemed impossible for human vocal cords. Yuna had never understood why her grandmother was so insistent. Pansori was an old art, dying out in the modern age. What use would it be in a universe of starships and alien worlds? But her grandmother had always said the same thing, in that quiet, certain voice of hers. Someday, your voice will save your life. I do not know how, but I know it is true. So you will learn and you will practice, and when the day comes, you will be ready. Yuna had thought it was just the words of an old woman who loved the old ways. But now, sitting in the darkness of an alien ravine with predators circling in the shadows, she wondered. She hummed louder, experimenting with different tones. She watched the fungi on the walls respond, flickering and pulsing with each change in frequency. She pushed her voice higher, reaching for the notes her grandmother had taught her, the notes at the edge of human capability. The fungi began to dim. Yuna stopped, her heart pounding. She had done that. With her voice alone, she had affected the fungi the same way Somi had with her scientific equipment. She tried again, pushing higher, sustaining the note as long as she could. The fungi dimmed further, their blue light fading until the wall was almost completely dark. In that darkness, she heard something new. A sound from the night moths, but different from their usual howls. Higher, more frantic. Almost like distress. She stopped singing, and the fungi slowly returned to their normal glow. The night moth sounds faded back into their usual clicking and occasional howl. Yuna sat very still, her mind racing. Could it be possible? Could a human voice, properly trained, produce the frequency they needed? Could she become the weapon they were looking for? She thought about the modified plasma cutter tHFY was building. It might work, but it would be limited, unreliable, single use. But a voice could be used again and again, for as long as the singer had strength to sing. There was only one problem. The frequency required was at the absolute limit of human capability. Sustaining it for any length of time, especially under the stress of combat, would be almost impossible. The strain could damage her vocal cords permanently. It could destroy her ability to speak. But if she did not try, they would all die anyway. Yuna stood and walked to where Somi was still working. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need you to help me understand, if it is possible. She explained what she had discovered, what she had done with her voice. Somi listened with growing amazement, then began running calculations on her scanner. Theoretically, it is possible, Somi said finally. The human voice is remarkable. With training and the right technique, some humans can reach frequencies that most species cannot. But sustaining that frequency for more than a few seconds. She shook her head. The strain would be incredible. The damage to your voice could be permanent. Could it work? Could I blind the night moths long enough for us to survive? Somi was quiet for a long moment. Maybe. If you could sustain the frequency, if you could project it loudly enough, if you could maintain focus while those things are attacking, maybe. Yuna nodded slowly. Then I will try. She returned to the cave entrance and began to practice, pushing her voice higher and higher, feeling the strain in her throat, the burn in her lungs. She remembered her grandmother's lessons, the breathing techniques, the ways to shape and control sound. In the darkness, the night moths howled. But Yuna did not stop singing. The attack came on the fifth night. Yuna had spent the entire day practicing, pushing her voice to its limits and beyond. Her throat was raw, her lungs ached, and her head throbbed with the effort of sustaining notes that no human should be able to reach. But she could do it now. She could produce the frequency that made the fungi go dark. She could hold it for minutes at a time. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. tHFY had finished modifying the plasma cutter. It sat at the back of the cave, a last resort if Yuna's voice failed. The other plasma cutter remained their only traditional weapon, held now by tHFY himself. Somi had a knife she had found in the wreckage. Do-hyun had nothing but his hands and his fear. They knew the attack was coming. The night moths had been silent all day, their usual clicking and distant howls replaced by an ominous quiet. The creatures were gathering, preparing, making ready for a final assault. When the sun set on the surface far above them, when the already dim ravine grew somehow darker, the night moths announced themselves. A single howl rose from the darkness. It was followed by another and another, until dozens of voices joined in a terrible chorus. The sound echoed off the stone walls, amplified and multiplied until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was designed to overwhelm, to paralyze prey with pure terror. Do-hyun screamed and fell to his knees, his hands over his ears. Somi stumbled backward, a knife falling from her shaking fingers. Even tHFY, who had faced dangerous situations before, took an involuntary step toward the back of the cave. But Yuna stood firm. She had heard these howls for 5 days now. She had learned their rhythms, their patterns, their purpose. They were weapons, yes. But so was she. The first night maw appeared at the edge of the blue light from the fungi. Then another. Then more, until Yuna could see at least a dozen of the creatures arrayed before the cave entrance. Their black plates gleamed in the soft glow. Their eyeless faces turned toward her, their mouths open to show rows of curved teeth. They did not rush forward immediately. They stood there, howling, trying to break the humans with fear alone. They were confident. They had never lost a hunt before. The one death, the pack member Yuna had killed, had surprised them. But now they had gathered their full strength. Now there was no escape. Yuna looked at the creatures that had stalked her through the darkness, the predators that had killed her crewmates and hunted the survivors for 5 endless days. She felt her fear, acknowledged it, and set it aside. Then she opened her mouth and began to sing. The song started low, almost too quiet to hear over the howls of the night moths. It was an old lullaby, one her grandmother had sung to her as a child, about a mother watching over her sleeping child through a long winter night. The words meant nothing here, in this alien place far from Earth, but the melody was beautiful, haunting, sad. The night moths paused, their howls faltering for just a moment. They had never heard anything like this before. Their prey ran, screamed, fought, died. It did not sing. Yuna pushed higher. The lullaby began to change, the notes stretching beyond their normal range. She used every technique her grandmother had taught her, controlling her breath, shaping her throat, finding resonances in her skull and chest that amplified the sound. The fungi on the walls began to flicker. The night moths felt it immediately. Their howls grew uncertain, confused. The map they relied on was becoming unstable, the familiar patterns of light and dark shifting into chaos. Yuna pushed harder still. The song was no longer a lullaby now. It was something else entirely, a sound that existed at the very edge of human capability. It was a weapon forged from breath and will and years of training. The first night maw charged. It came fast, its 6 legs carrying it across the rocky ground in a blur of motion. But Yuna did not stop singing. She stood her ground, her voice rising higher and higher, and the creature stumbled. The fungi had gone dark. The Nightmaw's echolocation returned nothing but silence. For the first time in its existence, it was truly blind. It crashed into the cave wall beside Yuna, missing her by inches. tHFY fired his plasma cutter, and the creature screamed and fell. More Nightmaws charged. They came from all directions, a tide of black plates and curved teeth, howling their fury and hunger. But their howls no longer worked. The fungi were dark, their navigation system destroyed, and they crashed into each other, into walls, into rock formations that had always been there but were now invisible. Yuna sang on. Her throat burned like fire. She could taste blood in the back of her mouth. Blood vessels burst in her eyes, turning the whites red. Her lungs screamed for air, but she denied them, pushing out every last breath in service of the sound. The Nightmaws were panicking now. These creatures that had ruled the ravine for generations, that had never known fear, were suddenly helpless. They could not find their prey. They could not find each other. They could not find the walls or the floor or anything at all. Their world had become a void of silence. One by one, they fled. They scrambled over each other in their desperation to escape, their claws tearing at their own pack members as they fought to get away from the terrible sound that had stolen their sight. Their howls became screams of pure terror, the cries of predators who had suddenly become prey. Yuna did not stop. She sang until the last Nightmaw had disappeared into the darkness. She sang until the ravine was silent except for her voice. She sang until her body could not take any more, until her legs gave out and she collapsed to the ground. The fungi slowly began to glow again, their soft blue light returning to the walls. In that light, Yuna could see the carnage of the battle. 3 Nightmaws lay dead, killed by tHFY's plasma cutter or crushed in the panic of the retreat. Ichor and broken plates littered the ground. tHFY was at her side immediately, helping her sit up. Somi ran forward with medical supplies. Even though Yoon emerged from the back of the cave, his face pale but his eyes clear for the first time in days. Yuna tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her voice was gone, destroyed by the strain of what she had done. She might never speak again, might never sing again. The medical treatment that could repair such damage was far away, on stations and ships that felt like another universe. But they were alive. All of them were alive. Somi examined Yuna's throat, her scanner humming softly. "The damage is severe," she said quietly, "but not permanent. With proper treatment, you will recover. Your voice will come back." Yuna tried to smile, but tears were running down her face instead. Tears of relief, of pain, of something she could not name. tHFY looked out at the ravine, at the retreating forms of the Nightmaws still visible in the distance. "They are not coming back," he said. "Listen, they are still running." He was right. Yuna could hear the creatures crashing through the ravine, fleeing in blind terror from the cave, where their prey had become something else entirely. They would run until they could run no more, until they found some corner of the ravine that the terrible sound had not touched. They would tell stories, in whatever way creatures like them told stories. They would warn their offspring about the small, soft things that had come from the sky, the things that did not run, did not fight, but sang instead, the things that had made the darkness itself go blind. Do-hyun knelt beside Yuna, his earlier fear replaced by something like wonder. "How did you do that?" he asked. "How did you know you could?" Yuna could not answer with words, so she simply pointed at her heart. Some things could not be explained. Some things came from a place deeper than knowledge or training, a place where human stubbornness and human creativity and human refusal to die came together into something stronger than any predator. Her grandmother had known. Somehow, across years and light years, Across the gap between old Earth and distant stars, her grandmother had known that one day a song would save her granddaughter's life. In the darkness of the ravine, no nightmare howled. Only silence remained, and somewhere in that silence, the echo of a human song. The rescue ship arrived the next morning, guided by the weak signal of the distress beacon that had been calling into the void for 6 days. The crew of the Stellar Hope expected to find wreckage, bodies, maybe a few survivors clinging to life. What they found instead was something they would never forget. 4 humans sat outside a small cave, watching the rescue shuttle descend. They were thin, tired, covered in dirt and dried blood, but they were alive, all of them. The rescue team. Leader, a tall woman named Captain Song Mina, was the first to reach them. She had seen crash survivors before, had pulled the lucky ones from burning wreckage on a dozen worlds. But something was different here. The survivors did not have the desperate, grateful look she usually saw. They had something else in their eyes. Something that looked almost like pride. What happened here? Mina asked, looking around at the ravine with its strange glowing fungi and its ominous darkness. tHFY was the one who answered, since Yuna still could not speak. We crashed. We were hunted. We survived. Hunted? By what? He pointed into the darkness of the ravine. By things that live down there. Creatures that hunt by sound. They came for us every night for 5 days. He paused, looking at Yuna with an expression that Mina could not quite read. She drove them away. One person? Against predators? Mina sounded skeptical. She had heard exaggerated survival stories before. She sang to them, tHFY said, and they ran. Mina did not understand, but she could see that these people needed medical attention more than they needed to tell their story. She helped them onto the rescue shuttle and ordered the pilot to take off. As they rose above the ravine, she looked down at the endless darkness one last time. Something moved down there at the edge of her vision. Large shapes, staying far away from the crash site. Staying far away from the cave where the humans had sheltered. She remembered what tHFY had said. She sang to them, and they ran. What kind of song could make predators run? The survivors were taken to a medical station in orbit around the nearest inhabited planet. Yuna received treatment for her damaged vocal cords, spending weeks in recovery while the doctors worked to repair what she had done to herself. Somi was debriefed by xenobiologists eager to learn about the nightmares and their strange relationship with the glowing fungi. tHFY and Do-hyun were interviewed by journalists who wanted to know how 4 people had survived against impossible odds. The story spread through the galactic networks like wildfire. At first, many species dismissed it as human exaggeration. Humans were known for telling tall tales about themselves, stories of courage and determination that seemed designed more for entertainment than truth. The idea that a single human voice could drive away apex predators sounded like exactly the kind of myth humans love to tell. But then the xenobiologists confirmed Somi's research. The nightmares were real. The sound-sensitive fungi were real. The frequency that could disrupt their navigation system was real. And yes, it was theoretically possible for a trained human voice to produce that frequency, though the physical cost would be severe. The story changed from myth to fact, and the galaxy began to pay attention. The Vakil were the first to request contact. They were an ancient species, millions of years old, who had lost their homeworld to predators not unlike the nightmares. They had survived by fleeing, by hiding, by never fighting back. The idea that a prey species could become the hunter, that sound could be used as a weapon, fascinated them. They wanted to learn. Other species followed. The consortium of hunters, a guild of predator species who made their living tracking dangerous creatures across the galaxy, had always dismissed humans as too soft, too weak, too fragile for serious hunting work. Now they reconsidered. Any species that could produce a weapon from their own body, that could turn the very nature of a predator against it, was worth studying. Scientists from a dozen worlds came to examine the moon designated KX-7. They studied the ravine, the fungi, the night maws that still lived in its depths. They learned everything they could about how sound moved through that place, how the creatures had evolved, how a human voice had broken their domination. And they learned something else, something that surprised even the most skeptical observers. The night maws remembered. When the scientists played recordings of Yuna's song, the creatures fled. They would not come within a kilometer of the sound. The behavior was inherited, passed down to offspring who had never heard the original song. A fear response, burned into their very genes by a single night of terror. One human, one song, and a species of apex predators would never be the same. When Yuna finally recovered her voice, it was different than before. Softer, rougher, carrying a hint of the strain she had put it through. The doctor said it would never be quite the same as it was. She would never sing the way she once had. But Yuna did not mind. Her grandmother had told her that her voice would save her life. She had not said it would survive the saving. She returned to space, but not as a survey crew member. She traveled now as a consultant, teaching other species about the power of sound. She worked with xenobiologists to identify other predators that might be vulnerable to acoustic weapons. She helped develop training programs for humans who wanted to learn the techniques she had used. Her grandmother's songs spread across the galaxy. They were translated, adapted, changed to fit alien throats and alien languages. But the core of them remained the same. The breathing techniques, the control, the understanding that a voice was not just a tool for communication, but a weapon that could never be taken away. On the moon KX-7, the ravine remained empty of human presence. But the rescue team had placed a marker at the crash site before they left. It was a simple monument, a metal pillar with words carved in 12 different languages. The words were the same in all of them. Here, a human sang. The darkness listened. Scientists and tourists came to see it sometimes. They would stand at the edge of the ravine and listen to the silence, trying to imagine what it had been like. Some of them played recordings of Yuna's song, watching the fungi flicker and dim, watching the shapes in the darkness flee. In the deepest parts of the ravine, the night maws lived on. They hunted smaller prey now, things that did not sing, things that ran and screamed and died the way prey was supposed to. They avoided the crash site in the cave and the path the humans had walked. They told their young, in whatever way creatures like them could tell, that some prey was not worth hunting. The small soft things from the stars, the things that did not run, the things that did not fight, the things that opened their mouths and made the night go blind. Yuna lived for many more years, traveling the stars, teaching, learning, singing when her damaged voice allowed. She never forgot the ravine or the creatures that hunted her or the song that saved her life. She never forgot her grandmother, who had known somehow that the old ways would matter even in a universe of impossible distances. When she finally died, old and tired and satisfied, her students carried on her work. The techniques she had learned and taught spread through human space and beyond. Other species developed their own methods, inspired by what a single human had done in a dark ravine on a forgotten moon. And somewhere in the vast archives of galactic history, her story was recorded. Not as myth, not as legend, but as simple fact. A predator howled in the dark ravine. It expected prey. It expected fear. It expected the screaming and the running and the dying that had always followed its hunt. But the human began to sing, and the predator fell silent. Because in the end, that was what humans did. They found the weakness in things that should have killed them. They turned their own bodies into weapons. They refused to be prey, even when everything said they should be. The darkness was old and hungry and patient. But the human song was older still.